crap. Good afternoon, friends. I'd like to welcome you today to What's in Tegan's Storage Locker. It's the show that dares to ask the question, just what is in my storage locker? The answer today, well, the answer is always going to be comic books. I look through a pile of comic books here that I've plucked from various storage facilities, and we go through them on camera for your entertainment. And there's a little black cat who likes to careen through the set like a bowling ball. And I've been running around the apartment trying to for over a half hour, I'd say by now, trying to wear him down. And I don't know, I guess history will be the judge, because I've started this episode already over half a dozen times. That's what we have to deal with here. He's a menace. He is a menace. There's no ambiguity there. All right, so let's start off looking at this issue of Spellbound. This is late 1987, early Tom DeFalco years at Marvel. The mid-'80s were kind of gloomy at the company. And in 1987, Tom DeFalco took over, and there was I'd say, a sustained springtime in terms of just the tone of the line. And it was a very experimental period in a lot of ways, if you look at the range of what they were publishing. And then, of course, they got really popular in the second half of Tom DeFalco's tenure, and mistakes were made, I think. But the first part of his run, where a more positive vision of the line comes into focus, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff from this period. The Nth Man is from this period. This is when Marvel started publishing Mobius and Akira, both, in the late 80s. So, I'd say it's a pretty decent period in the company's history that's maybe gone a little bit underrated, because it doesn't have a lot of drama around it. Once Jim Shooter's out the door, there are a few wildfires. There's the Steve Englehart situation, which made a good portion of the line kind of a mess for a few months. But for the most part, there seemed to be a lot of pent-up energy that was released in the late 80s. And a book like Spellbound, I think, I didn't read this the first time around. This came out right before the era where I was really getting into superhero comics heavily. But I picked up, I think, half of this 6-issue run out of some 50-cent boxes recently, and I'm just assuming I'll be able to pick up the others at some point down the line and put together a reading set and see what it's all about. But this is a very nice cover by, I think that's Marshall Rogers, with Bob Wyacek on inks. Not the names in the book, but that's a very nice, I mean, it's sort of she's falling, and that's our heroine, so that's our introduction to her. But the big figure is this green guy who's threatening, and that's a nice monster right in the middle of your page to attract your reader when they're looking at that on the stands. Oh, this M&M ad ran everywhere for a couple of years. This was in the DC books and the Marvel books. Now, I don't recall seeing the TSR ads at DC as much. It seemed like they pretty much owned the back cover of Marvel for a good solid couple of years there in the mid to late 80s. So it must have been a good period for TSR, because they had new product advertised just about every month. All right, so Louise Simonson, she wrote a fair amount of Marvel at this time. She was the reason why she was talented, but more to the point, she was one of a handful of writers who Chris Claremont trusted with his characters. And that was, I think, a pretty wise choice on his part. He had a handful of people that he worked with, who I think he knew and he was on friendly terms with. And he was on friendly terms with both of the Simonsons. And Walter Simonson would have a rather decently long run as a penciler on X Factor, co-writing, I think, with his wife. And those are some very readable comics. They had a book they needed to pull out of the ditch. And that's a very nice, very readable set of comic books, even if it prominently features Cyclops. Popedy's Nerfict. So, created by Louise Simonson and Carl Potts, who's the inker here. He was also working as an editor, though. He's not the credited editor here. It's Bob Harris, with Bobby Chase as managing editor. Now, Bobby Chase, she's a very talented editor, and I found myself enjoying most of the books that she put her name to. Reading this period of Marvel, it was an educational period in terms of really coming to understand what editors could do, because you had a number of different editors working at the company with a fair amount of leeway to reflect their personalities in the line's product. And I think it made for better comics across the line. That's why I remember Bobby Chase's name after all these years. And of course, Bob Harris also edited it, which is just one of those things that's going to happen. So, there's the big green monster, the dragon dude from the cover. He's menacing what appears to be pilots on... they're in a helicopter going over the city. Man, this is a nice-looking book. Terry Shoemaker, he did a fair amount of work also on the X books, also on X Factor. I think he drew a fair amount of X Factor after Walter left, although this, I think, Walter was still on X Factor at the time this book hit the stands. I want to say maybe he did some New Mutants, too. So he did some work around the X office. And it's not hard to see why. He was absolutely 100% rock solid. He never seemed to find the project that could really push him ahead, is my understanding of it in hindsight. But this is a very nice looking comic book. Very good at drawing actual people. Looking at the character on the page, she seems maybe, she has a little bit of an Amethyst Princess of Gem World vibe, although they're obviously in the real world, they're not in a fantasy world. But it's a fantasy hero with fantasy elements. There's a fairy-type person, albeit with a checkerboard leotard on. So it's got an interesting vibe to it. Oh, that's a very nice drawing. That's very lovely. Oh, yes. Terry Shoemaker was very talented. Do not doubt me. Anytime you see his name on a book, flip through it. You might see something interesting. Because that's actually that's not an easy thing to do. A lot of decent artists would trip over a whole book with a protagonist who's basically in a leotard, a rather unflattering costume. So you have to actually be fairly decent at drawing the human figure for that. I always think of Dagger from Cloak and Dagger as being a real acid test character for an artist, because there's absolutely no elaboration to her costume. It's completely white bodysuit, and if you don't know how to draw, you're going to struggle with it. And it's the simplest design in the world. And look at Cloak and Dagger, and you'll see what I mean. Anytime they try to mess up the cleanness of that costume, I think you're kind of missing the point, which is that it's supposed to be a test of skill for the artist. Anyway, this is fairies and various fantasy beasties, but they're going around modern-day New York. Oh, and here's Captain Power. I think I watched this, but I remember absolutely nothing about it. It had this gimmick that even as a kid I knew that there was no way you could shoot the TV and have it affect the outcome of the story. I didn't have the toy, so that was very obvious to me. So I didn't feel any need to get the toy. Perhaps that was not the reaction they were hoping to elicit from potential consumers. So yeah, this is a very nice sequence. Some nice color holds there. Oh, the depiction of this dragon magic is very interesting. It's a magic book that doesn't seem to owe a lot to what was going on in Doctor Strange either. This is I guess it's a whole new character with a whole new, I don't recognize this guy, and she's a whole new character that was launched in this series. And then I don't think anything became of her. She may have appeared, like I say, maybe in a Doctor Strange arc at some point, but I'm trying to think. And wow, this is just such a nice looking book. Look at that angle. Look at that cheekbone. Wow. Yeah, this is the business. This is the business right here. This is an excellent looking comic book. Be on the lookout for this one. Be on the lookout for this after just a few pages. I can tell this, I'm not reading it, but it looks so nice. Look at this. This is just a 1/6 of the page is just stuffed with all these figures, these reporters flocking to her room because apparently, her apartment, because apparently, they saw her being a superhero. Or they followed the superhero, either way. Oh, I think that's her boyfriend, I want to say. Eric? See, I never read any of this book, but I read her entry in the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. So, she's got some magics. I know, I'm not telling you anything. From what I recall, it's basically just a normal person who gets dragged into magic shenanigans. So, nothing really became of her, like I say. The character wasn't picked up on. And they were still hawking the team-up book, or the try-up book, sorry. This was a late Shooter era initiative that really saw great dividends in the DeFalco period. All you got to do is look at the career of Mark Bagley. That's the guy who won that contest, and the rest was history. They got their money's worth out of however much it cost to put that out. I had a copy too. It might still be under something because it's not a normal comic book size. It's this diving board size that was the size of real art. So even if you didn't, here's the thing, even if you didn't actually care to try out, because I was too young at the time, I didn't have the talent, it's still, if you see a copy of this book, it is an amazing education in just how comic books were put together for decades in this country, because it shows you step by step, pages, color to ink to letter to script to draw to plot. And that's not the order that it's done in reality, but it's a understanding of how each of these disciplines operates. Very, very informative if you see a copy. For all I know, they may even honor submissions on this paper. I don't know. Has anyone tried to do that in a while? All right. Who colored this? Christy Shield. Yes, that's some very nice pre-digital gradients. We're so used to being sick of gradients, but back in the day, it maybe would have. I think gradients had a different hit in the pre-digital era. We kind of got used to. We kind of got sick of them, and the reason we got sick of them is because it was a once rather, time-consuming effect, I believe, that was rendered, with a click of a mouse. That's, when new technology takes over. It's interesting to see the things that dominate the landscape, making up for the weaknesses of the previous regime. Enough tech talk. I'm woefully, if I ever actually start to talk about the technical aspects of coloring, I'm woefully undereducated because I've tried to read. We've actually had fairly detailed conversations about coloring on the podcast with Claire. It's Udder Madness, where we talk about Top Cow. And I have to say, it is very difficult to keep in your head. I imagine if I was watching someone do it, it might be easier to understand. But especially in the 90s, when they were making the crossover from analog to digital coloring, there were a few years there where the process was kind of complicated. And they've gone back in recent years to using multiple names because a lot of books will use flatters, and I've had people try to explain that to me a number of times, and it just doesn't stick. So this is people sitting around, just young kids sitting around, socializing, playing rock music, all based on, all stuff that has to be built on expression, body language, just people sort of chilling in their unguarded moments. Not the easiest thing for superhero artists to always draw. Oh, I don't know about these fashions that people are wearing. I think that's more or less correct. But this I think, is supposed to be New Waver high school student. Oh man, I remember I used to, this is the early years of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Konami was one of the first third-party licensors that really seemed to have a presence on the ad pages, and all their games had the same, at least in this period, they had the same box. Early Castlevania, before the main characters at all defined. Do they still do Double Dribble? It seems like they did a number of Double Dribbled games. And of course the Goonies 2. Goonies 2 only happened in video games. Top Gun, I think people like that one. But for the most part, these games, this was like the first generation of NES. And I think I got in right at the second generation or so, around there, after the release of the second Mario Brothers. I think the first Castlevania I played was number 2. I know this is walk down memory lane, but people care about these old video games. Possibly you're one of them. Man, this is just a lovely looking comic book. I have no idea. It looks like they're taking the time to really build up a character, to give her supporting cast, to give her quotidian concerns, a life. But just look at this. Look at how wonderful. Although the coloring's a little bit blotchy there. Look at how wonderful this looks. You see something here, I think, in the same ballpark as Colleen Doran, who was working at the time. I want to say A Distant Soil was already coming out from Warp Graphics at the time. And you can definitely see that there's a similar set of influences. This is just, and some of that credit has to go to Carl Potts. It's always kind of striking to run across Carl Potts' art in Marvel, because you realize he could have been a much bigger name than he was. I don't know why he didn't go further, but he was an extraordinarily talented artist who chose not to, for the most part. He did little things. He did inks, he did layouts, but there's he didn't have a big spotlight book that you can point to. Like Bob Budiansky as well, another excellent artist. I've spent a lot of time singing the praises of Bob Budiansky as an artist. I think he should have been a much more popular artist than he was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, point being, Carl Potts, Bob Budiansky, two excellent artists who got sucked into editorial and just ended up de-emphasizing the art in their careers. All right, so the dragon's shown up and she hears about it on the telephone, back when telephones were these big gray monstrosities. And the government, the phone company, owned the phone in your house. And that was the law for years. And that's why phones stayed the same for the longest time. And then you look back, if you're paying attention, you can look back and see sometime in the mid-'80s, phones start to change because they let people make their own phones and start buying them separate from the phone company. So suddenly they're all shaped like Garfield. And my goodness, I could not have planned that better, because profile, Bob Budiansky, he was an editor. He was at this point doing all the toy books, Air Raiders, Visionaries. Neither Air Raiders, I want to say, I don't know if it got past 3 issues. Had some early, I want to say early Kelly Jones work on it. Visionaries, early Mark Bagley. It was Mark, so they were still running the ads for the team-up book after Mark Bagley had already, they kept the bait in the tank, so to speak. But yeah, Visionaries was his first monthly book after he took over the last few months of Night Mask. Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night. I've seen that comic. I think I've seen the cover once in my life. One of those, late 80s Marvel movie adaptations that no one really remembers, but sometimes you look back and you see interesting people on them. Marvel Press posters. They've started putting out posters again. I even bought one. I bought a big poster of the cover of the first issue of Secret Wars the other week. And when I have more money, I'd like to get it framed. But they put out a lot of new work on posters. In fact, that was actually famously something that the image artists knew well. Todd McFarlane was upfront about the fact that they pay you more to draw a poster than a comic book. So you should draw lots of posters. And Todd McFarlane did draw a number of posters for Marvel. I don't think they're in print, though. There's a lot of classic Marvel posters that could probably stand to come into print. That's something I've always thought that they should have someone. Okay, this is a tangent that you don't need to hear, but I've always thought on-demand printmaking would be a no-brainer for Marvel. They've had that technology for decades. You've been able to go online and buy decent prints of art prints online, but not for comic book stuff. And that's always just seemed like a no-brainer for me. So yeah, the penciler co-plotter on Ghost Rider, which we read on the TikTok site, and there's a compilation of those videos on this very YouTube account. I love his Ghost Rider. It is my favorite iteration of Ghost Rider. The Submariner Limited series, which was his last major work as a penciler. So this is the quote of the month. Behold the savage tempest which I have summoned to blast ye back to the Stygian slime from whence ye came. It's from the very beginning of the Tom DeFalco Thor run. Because, it's Marvel, the editor-in-chief, needs to be writing a book. And to be honest with you, it went too far, especially in the 80s when they had editors writing 2 or 3 books a month. It got out of hand. But I think the line was stronger when editors were encouraged to freelance, because it gave them, it's sort of like, maybe this analogy isn't going to really make a lot of sense, but if you ever read about classic Freudian analysis, it's part of the program that the analysis should be under analysis themselves, as as part of the process, learning how it works from multiple angles, as a bit of professional hygiene, so to speak. And I've always thought that was a good piece of advice to keep for comic book editing as well. The books seemed to be better when editors had more of a hand in the making of the comic books. And then they discouraged that. And then that also means they discouraged a certain type of person, a certain type of creator, from going into the editorial field. I could go off on this, I'm sorry. I think the books were really well edited in this period. They had a really strong, talented group of editors at the company. Talent that they had spent years nurturing internally from a freelance pool. And that's not how they hire editors anymore. It's not how they can afford to hire editors anymore. Man, this is just such a lovely looking comic book, and I understand nothing of what's happening in it. But yeah, just look at this. This Terry Shoemaker guy, he's the business. He knows what he's doing. This is not slouch work. Now, you know, one of the things about Louise Simonson's work, I'm thinking, looking back on this, is it's very dense. It's very mid-'80s Marvel, dense in terms of, you know, there's a lot of word balloons, there's a lot of stuff happening, there's a number of panels, but it rolls right along. It's not a slow read. It's not bulky by any means. I think it's just a brisk comic book where a number of things happen. Certainly more things happened in this comic book than in most books that you'll probably pick up off the stands today. Next issue, Roy's big debut, Zaz's Rumble at the Ritz, all this, and the New Mutants too. So there was going to be an obligatory mutant crossover to tie the character to the Marvel Universe, but it didn't really stick that well. But I do remember seeing from her handbook entry, they do have a picture of her fighting Zax, the Hulk enemy, who's just a giant ball of electricity. So, all right, and that's a fairly healthy subscription form. The thing is, most of these books lasted many years, so this was a very healthy period. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, yeah, most of these books on this subscription form lasted for a long time. So they had a very stable line. All right, we already looked at the back cover there. How are we doing? Oh, well, we spent plenty of time talking about one comic book, me going off on a number of tangents. What else are we going to look at here? Okay, I got one for you. Electric Superman. This is from the tail end of Dan Jurgens' stint on the Superman books. He was writing at this point for Ron Frenz. This is during Ron Frenz's period, which I mentioned the other day, and that's the reason why I grabbed this. I mentioned his run on the Superman books a while back. And he did a fair amount of Superman books. He was there for a couple years. He got to draw the electric blue Superman, which, you know, the storylines come in for some of a drubbing. And you can't say in some instances it's not deserved, because it's kind of a blight in some respects on the first year of Grant Morrison's JLA. That, as good as those stories are, well, Superman's electric blue in the middle of them. And they make it work. Don't get me wrong. Those are some excellent Superman moments. But everyone involved recognizes that they're kind of a workaround for the fact that the main books are just going with this really kind of weird status quo for Superman for, I think this was the better part of the year. And then they had a big crossover, of course, to undo it. It was the Millennium Giants storyline. And frankly, the Millennium Giants I was still, even on board this much, I was still buying. But after the Millennium Giants, I don't know. I think that was kind of, I should have stopped buying completely. I kept going for a little while, but not too long. Who's inking this? This is, Joe Rubinstein. So this is two Marvel veterans working on Superman in the second decade of their career. It's the tale as old as time. We saw the ad for these Batman toys the other day, I think. I can't even remember if I had that Bane, but that is a very nice comics-accurate adaptation of Bane, and then like 5 neon monstrosities. All right. So, okay, this is early. This is him just. There was a storyline where his powers were going out of control, and he didn't understand what was happening. There was some incident of some variety, and eventually this is what happened. He ends up getting electrical powers, energy powers in general, but it involves his whole body changing over to be an electrical creature. And there was an interesting aspect to the character in this period. When he was Superman Blue, he had all his electrical powers. But when he wanted to be Clark Kent, he was a normal human. And that was an interesting aspect of the storyline. So Dan Jurgens, as I said, although he did the cover too, I should point out, with Rubenstein on inks. Ron Frenz, penciler. John Costanza letters. Glenn Whitmore coloring with digital chameleon separators. So they had multiple names on the color box at this time. Well, that's very nice though. But they're illustrating the how his new powers are making him perceive the world. So that's kind of a nice early digital effect there. And there's this blue guy with the horns. What was his name? Like Curse, I want to say. I can't remember. He was a supporting player for a couple years at least. And then he just didn't, nothing really became of him. He was one of many Superman supporting characters who sort of, like Ron Troop. When was the last time they used Ron Troop? He was big for a couple years. I liked him. He was a good match for Lucy Lane. That was a good sort of grown-up romantic soap opera subplot. Because the characters in Superman are grown-ups. This is very nice. Very nice. And Ron Frenz, he's an absolute pro's pro. So he takes it completely in stride that he has to draw Superman as this weird electrical creature. From what I understand, he didn't completely enjoy his time on the books. That's just from interviews. But you don't really see it in the work. It's still, he can't not draw a readable comic book. We looked, he did the Firelord two-parter that we looked at, and he did the Thor comics that we looked at a while back, and which we may probably look at some point in the future. We may look at something in the later part of that run when I think it was Al Milgrom inking him instead of Joe Sinnott. Oh, the Ralph Lauren ads were... Oh, that's, I guess, Ralph Lauren kids. That's... Already you could tell the demographic was slightly starting to shift upwards from the Gap. I remember suddenly the designer labels wanted in on the comic books, and that lasted a good few years. That's a nice looking page with a very classic looking Lex Luthor rocking the business suit. And it's a nice shadow effect on her face with the looks like a old school Zipatone. Oh, and there he is, like, I don't know what's going on. Something's happening with my powers. We got a problem. Have a blast with Mootown. So that's, what was that guy's name? Trying to remember. He was in Superboy a lot. He was a Superboy supporting character, I think, around this time. His name is not coming to me. This is a character who was also in the books around this time. She was, I'm not going to say a love interest for Lex Luthor, but she was definitely someone who Lex Luthor was actually attracted to, which gave her sort of a strange presence in the books. It was not necessarily a bad character either. I remember sort of a nebulous character in terms of her allegiances. Hamilton. I think that's the guy's name, Hamilton. All right, Professor Hamilton. That's the contestant. And here's a Jack Davis Tang ad. Tang was doing a big promo with Mad Magazine, I guess. They still sell Tang. Maybe you grew up drinking Tang. Oh, orangutan. Okay, I just got that. All right. Mean looking Lois Lane. She's not happy about what's going on. There's this dude. Oh, so he gets on this boat. This guy has a heart attack, and he's not a bad guy. Just people keep reacting to him like he's a monster because he looks like a monster. So he makes Superman a new costume with weird microcircuitry to, constrain his new powers. The only thing I'm sure of is that if it doesn't work, Superman will be lost to us forever. Oh, and here's these jokers. Snap, crackle, and pop. I've always thought that you don't need to hear this, but I've always thought that the Rice Krispies treats that you get in a box, they're always stale. Always stale. Absolutely nothing can compete with the real deal made at home. Oh man, I haven't made those in forever. I just talked myself into making homemade Rice Krispie treats. I haven't done that in literally years. I'm going to get that next time I go to the store. We're going to have fun. I just talked myself into that. You got to treat yourself. It's a hard world out there. And here he is zipping along. Oh, there he goes back to human for the first time. And then he zaps back into town. Yeah, it's a nice sequence. It sells the difference. He flies via these lightning bolts now. Kids Foot Locker. What was I just saying? And they're talking about Kansas State. Kansas State basketball. Oh, wow. That's nice. As good as this guy could look, this is pretty good. Later on, they split him into a Superman red and a Superman blue, which, it was certainly a thing they did. And so he brings the monster to the hospital. They're like, what are you doing? He's like, well, I'm trying to save the guy's life. What are you doing? Oh, and they're running letters. They had just married them. So that was this big event that sort of, I don't want to say it came out of nowhere. The thing is that they had been engaged since like 1990, I want to say. And then they had a long engagement because this is 97. So it's not like it wasn't maybe overdue. Now, I'm going to posit that people never really regretted the Superman marriage in the same way that they palpably regretted the Spider-Man marriage. And I think certainly the Superman stories from the New 52 era, when they tried wiping the slate, I think they kind of proved the point that it wasn't poorly received at the time simply because people didn't feel like they were foreclosing any story options for Superman by marrying him to Lois Lane. It was simply the logical evolution of the story, since she knew who he was, and they weren't going to be undoing that. That became one of the core dynamics of the strip for decades, and whenever they've tried to undo it, they've walked it back because it doesn't make sense otherwise. People don't want to go back to her and Lana Lang having catfights over Superman's affection. They're not going to do those love triangles anymore, so it doesn't make any sense for the characters to not be married. And I think they proved it when they unmarried them. They had a Superman who wasn't married to Lois Lane, And Lois Lane didn't even know he was Superman, and people didn't necessarily like it. Now I will, and because I will argue some things in favor of the new 52 Superman. I think he had some interesting stories. They tried to tell a couple different kinds of stories that they couldn't tell with the previous type of Superman. Were they the best Superman stories? No, they were not. But there were a few people on those books at the time who tried to use the blank slate as an opportunity to do something different, and people ultimately rejected it. And maybe they rejected it partly because of the execution, and maybe they rejected it because the idea of going back to an older status quo on many of the core Superman story motors just was unappealing. People like Superman and Lois Lane together. Separating them doesn't seem to play very well. Okay, here's an interesting one. Agent X #4. This is from the early Joe Quesada period at Marvel in the early 2000s. Another period that was defined largely by throwing stuff at the walls to see what sticks period. Often Marvel's most interesting periods when they feel freedom, the wind at their back to try different things. And this was certainly a different thing because Agent X was Deadpool, sort of. It's kind of complicated, and frankly, it's been a long time since I read the actual comics that deal with it. But this guy, he's not Deadpool, but he sort of fills a Deadpool-shaped hole in the story. It's a whole thing. It's worth reading, though, because it's early Gail Simone when she was just getting her legs under her in the world of monthly comic books. Yeah, this is 2002. I think her first work was 2001. I want to say that was the Simpsons Comics number 50. See, I still remember my Gail Simone trivia there. And this was early work in American comics by this is a number of people. Alvin Lee, Rob Ross, Omar Dogan, Thoreau, Shane Law, Calvin Lowe, and Ken Soo Chong. Oh, that's the Udon Studios, I guess. I wanted to say that, and that's who all those people are. Udon chief Eric Koh. And that was a studio that did a fair amount of work at the time in what is clearly a manga-influenced style, because the mainstream at the period was really trying hard to figure out. You can't say they didn't make some fair game attempts to get some of that energy. And some of that was just down to hiring people who could draw like that. And that's where Udon Stories, that's where Pat Lee as well also came in. It wasn't enough to be, like Joe Madureira or Rob Liefeld or Ron Lim and just bring that influence in. They wanted wholesale to see if they could get their comics to look a little bit different. And they even tried some black and white publishing. There was this really odd series, which I'm probably going to go back and reread one of these days because it was odd enough for me to be interested in it at the time, called U.S. War Machine, which was a weekly black and white book that was an attempt to do something completely different in every way. I don't necessarily think it succeeded, but it was interesting. It was Chuck Austen. That was maybe one of the better Chuck Austen projects at the time, considering, we could talk about Chuck Austen. The thing is that on a book-to-book basis, he wasn't that bad of a writer, but sometimes he just had odd ideas about stories. Uncanny X-Men was kind of a cursed book for a few years there, a few years solid. They had a lot of trouble finding someone who could write that book. That just makes you want to go eat Starburst now, doesn't it? All right, so the whole point of this, as I alluded to, is it's not Deadpool, but it's sort of, he's connected to Deadpool in some way, and he's got a large supporting cast of other mercenaries. This outlaw character who I really like. She's a Gail Simone character who is that rarity, a mutant who's never really interacted with the X-Men. I don't even know if she was on Krakoa to any extent. She's a Domino supporting character. I really like her character. I've always thought her character could be huge, and they just never do anything with her. That's just her. She dresses like a skimpy cowgirl. She carries guns. She's a bounty hunter. It's about all you need from her. She's an excellent character. And I don't really remember who all these other people are. It has been a long time since I read these comics. And I don't have a full run of these. I picked some of these. I've read it in hindsight, and I've picked a few of the issues up here and there over the years. Like this, I paid like 50 cents for this randomly. So they're having some sort of, so he's looking at snails on the plate? I don't know. Sea monkey. They're eating sea monkeys. Oh, so that's very wholesome. Oh, and this was the period where, part and parcel with the manga, Gundam was really starting to make inroads. And I remember, because this was the early 2000s, even I bought a couple Gundam models at the time, just to, try them out and see what it was. And they were actually kind of fun to put together. But to actually do it well, you need to actually invest in more tools. If you want to just put them together, or at least the ones I bought, if you want to just put them together, you can put them in more or less out of the box. But if you actually want them to look nice, you have to invest in various, things. And still to this day, you can paint your Warhammer figurines with a nice matte finish so they all look pewter, or you can spend a lot of money learning how to paint those suckers. So, the urge to put together armies of little dudes is just really strong in mankind. All the way back to terracotta figures buried with the Emperor. Only now the Emperor is going to be buried with Funko Pops. All right. Oh, there's Crash Bandicoot. Or did I say Bandicoot? I've never played any of these games. Right? I didn't have a GameCube. And the Nintendo 64 was the last stop for me on the video game. No, that's not true. I did buy a Wii. When the Wii's got really cheap. I want to say I still have it in a box somewhere in storage, but I didn't really play it a lot before it went into. I gave it to my parents because that's how often I played it. So there's some sort of action sequence involving a bus. Oh, Blade 2. This movie. Everyone loves Blade 2. This movie was a big disappointment for me. I thought it was a huge step down from the first. And I know that's not a popular opinion, but I revere the first Blade. And the second one, I walked out of shaking my head. I still haven't seen it again. I didn't enjoy it. So, I don't know what these people are. This guy's got a big padlock around his neck. Higashi and Saguri. Well, there you go. Dungeons and Dragons for Game Boy Advance. So yeah, into the 2000s, they were still making money off the video game ads. That's when comics were cooked, was when they stopped being able to sell ads. They need to figure out a way to make a new package that's attractive to advertisers. Figure out a way to make advertising work again for comics, or the industry's in trouble. But you didn't hear that from me. I know I'm arguing for advertising. Well, advertising was what kept the prices as low as they were. If you want comics to ever be cheap again, by any relative standard, they need to be fat with ads. As it is, this still doesn't have a lot of ads in it. There's a tobacco ad and this is interesting because this is a Clive Barker idea. I don't think he wrote or directed this, but this is, I think, a script he did. Oh, you can see that they just put the nipple there, right on the back of the comic book. What are you doing? Well, someone is feeling his oats. This has the same name as one of those Marvel Barkerverse books, but from what my recollection is, this is a completely different concept. He just took the name, which was his name, and did up something new with it. I don't think this went anywhere either. So you see, they weren't doing that great for ads at this point either. There's the Taskmaster. Now, this version of the Taskmaster did end up, this look did end up being used for a while with him. And eventually, I think they revisited the older look with some of this aesthetic as well. Certainly, this is closer to where the MCU would put the character, although I don't think that's a very popular version of that character. What are you doing? Well, I suppose we got lucky there earlier. Anyway, this guy, this Alex is his name. He's doing something or other. I don't know, unless I take the time to actually read it. So, supporting cast doing stuff. This is a very well-regarded run. This is from the period, like I say, it filled a Deadpool-shaped hole at a period where Deadpool wasn't selling, and the book got canceled. So they had to think of something, interesting to dig it out of the hole, and that's sort of what they picked, was stem to stern revamp. And what do we got next? I think we got time for one more, and let's look at an issue of Spawn. People like Spawn. I look at Spawn because Spawn does well. People like this guy. People remember this guy. As strange as it may seem, I think if Todd McFarlane could actually get a new movie made, there would be an audience for it because people remember this character. I can tell you just based on the reaction Spawn stuff gets on social media. And that is a very nice Spawn. Great Capullo. 1995, I think this was. Oh, 1996. Oh, well, the cover says 95. Just Spawn doing what Spawn do, which is fire lots of big guns, because guns don't use up. Well, oh, come on. Guns don't use up the Spawnometer. So, that's why he used guns a lot. So, Greg Capullo, still penciling. Todd McFarlane, still doing the inks, but he's already starting to phase out in favor of Danny Miki. So Greg Capullo and Danny Miki would go on to work together a lot. And they work together well, and they still, I think, to this day, draw a comic with a bit of a McFarlane influence. He was a very strong influence on everyone he ended up collaborating with for any amount of time, because it's a very strong aesthetic. It tends to dominate the conversation. But he knows what makes a decent looking comic book. Or at least he did back in the day. I make no argument for, I know that just in the store today I saw Spawn $3.50. $3.50. Can you believe that? Doesn't quite look the same when I pick it up to flip through. That's one thing about Spawn. The reason why I bought it for as long as I did is just the fact that it looked interesting. It looked weird. It looked like nothing else on the stands. It looked very much like a Todd McFarlane comic book. And that was something that stood out, even after, you know, maybe it was a bit too consistent for its own good, if you know what I mean. That's a weird looking panel. Oh, there's the clown hanging out with Jason Wynn. So various secondary villains conspiring because, oh, there's the Spawnometer. It's at 6712. Very nice looking, though. And the early computer coloring isn't even... See, Spawn always had the best coloring, just about, in the whole industry. Brian Haberlin with Dan Kemp doing coloring on this. Certainly the early run of Spawn. Oh, some of those beautifully colored comic books you'll ever see. Kind of interesting read. Actually, a number of people I know have gone back and reread the early Spawn recently and discovered that it holds up better than they might have expected. But it very much knew what it was about very early. Now, the problem is that it stayed, oh man, there's your guy. There's your guy. You can do a lot of different things with Spawn. Oh, come on. He can have the billowing cape and the bats, or he can have, you know, big guns and high-tech, you know, military equipment. So you get to see Spawn running around with ammo belts. Oh, come on. All right, so he's already dealing with... see, I don't remember anything that was happening in this run of the book. He's already dealing with Terry Fitzgerald as a support guy. Oh, come on, honey. Let me get through this last damn comic book. Someone is just getting very fussy, so I need to finish up what we're doing here so I can go throw the ball around with him. All right. Oh, and there's our good old talking heads. What are you doing? People talking on the phone. Oh, you can tell the printing's a little bit munged up there because this is one of the newsstand editions that were printed on the pulpier paper. They didn't have the shiny stock stuff like the direct market printing did. You can tell this is newsstand because it was still doing decent on the newsstand as long as there was a newsstand. This is late 96. Oh, Spawn Night with the Detroit Whalers. Featuring the first Detroit appearance of Todd McFarlane, the creator of America's #1 comic book, Spawn, and the producer of the animated series on HBO, and next summer's highly... Do you mind? Next summer's highly anticipated state-of-the-art special effects movie. And certainly it was highly anticipated, and it came out in the next summer. State-of-the-art special effects? It had special effects. It had them. Like I say, they could do a better job by the character. There were decent things about it, don't get me wrong. Oh, so that's it. Okay, that's the last of it. So he gets these mean-looking future guns. And here's image info. So that's the real Terry Fitzgerald with Martin Sheen from, I'm guessing, the set of the Spawn movie. Martin plays that guy. Martin Sheen plays the dude with that crazy cigar. Yeah, this guy. Although I don't think they do the cigar scene in the Spawn movie. But that's the guy. Yeah, Jason Wynn. See, they did have a Spawn movie. It's interesting. Like I say, I'm not trying to dog the special effects because they were a little bit less than advertised, but at the same time, they obviously tried their best with a very tight budget. Oh, so they're printing a correction because the printed copy of the book didn't print the page, right? Big old Spawn letters page. Not recognizing any of these names. I'll be in Tacoma, Washington at the Tacoma Dome Sunday, December 1st to sign autographs. Oh, this is a nice pinup just in the back here. Who's that? Is that Kevin? Oh, I think that's a Kevin, but is that Day? Kevin Day? Kevin Lau, maybe? No. Does it say? Who did the pinup? It doesn't say who did the pinup. Oh. So here he's answering questions about, or he's talking about the action figures. Oh, so people are writing in about action figure questions. And he was really all in on the action figures. There he is. Tacoma Comics presents Spawn with Todd, Greg Capullo, Mike Grell. He was doing a Spawn spinoff at this moment. Curse of the Spawn, Judgment Day. And this is the first arc of Curse of the Spawn by Dwayne Turner. And this is an excellent run. An excellent run. I'm going to be writing something about it in the near future here, actually. That's how excellent it is. All right, I'm done. You don't have to disrupt the things anymore. I'm just showing the people the 1997 Todd Toys collection, which, you know, what is there to say? His toys look cool. Everyone acknowledges that the toys look cool. But then you take them out of the package and the joints break. From what I understand, that problem has not necessarily been alleviated in recent years. All right, so what do we got? We looked at 4 comics. The cat disrupted everything. It was a mess. But we made it. We survived. So look around on the channel. We got tons of other videos. This is like the 38th of these, I want to say. So you can just put me on when you go to bed and listen to me talk about comic books while you are in dreamland. Check out my TikTok and Instagram. I put the same videos up on both, whichever is your poison in terms of platform. I understand there's a lot of people who don't care for TikTok. I'm not particularly that fond of it myself, but I'm on it. And I'm on Instagram as well. I got a podcast with Claire Napier. It's called Udder Madness. It's about Top Cow Comics. That's Witchblade, The Darkness, Mark Silvestri, Michael Turner, all that good stuff. We're on YouTube. We have videos on YouTube. I just put up a video of our conversation, our first conversation on The Darkness, actually. Should be available just a click or two away. We also have a Patreon. We're on Spotify. We're on SoundCloud. We're everywhere you want to be. What else? Check out the Patreon for this show. That is how you show your appreciation. That is how you tell me that you like the show, you want more of it. You got to help me out, grow the show, tell all your friends. Thank you. Tell all your friends to watch this show where this crazy person duels with their cat for an hour and change sometimes. All right, have a wonderful day. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to you know the drill by now. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to the world, be kind to small children and animals, and just to have a wonderful day.